I was seated on a narrow, metal-framed bunk at a forward base in the middle of a dusty plateau, flipping through a battered paperback to keep my mind off the sweltering heat, when a corporal from admin rapped on my door, cleared his throat, and informed me that I'd received an urgent message. My brow furrowed in confusion because nobody, not even my closest friends, usually reached me through official channels unless it was dire. As I scanned the text of the message, my chest tightened. Apparently, my family had contacted my command, reporting that I was AWOL absent, without leave, claiming I'd simply disappeared. Shock rolled through me in waves. There was no rhyme or reason as to why they'd do such a thing, but the message was explicit. They claimed I'd run away, failing to show up to my duties, and that they feared I might be drifting around the world irresponsibly. It was completely false. I was, in fact, right where I was supposed to be, operating under official orders. The corporal gave me a slightly worried look, as though not sure whether he was delivering real news or stepping into the middle of a bizarre family drama. I thanked him in a clipped tone. My mind raced. I had to confirm my status, ensure that my commanding officer, Captain Alvarez, knew I was on legitimate orders. But as I stepped into the corridor, that wave of confusion shifted into cold anger. Why would my family lie like this? I had grown up in a small, somewhat fractured household. My father passed away when I was young, leaving behind me my mother and my sister Lorelei. Over time, Lorelei and I grew distant. She was 4 years older, always quick to judge me, especially when I joined the military. She constantly criticized my choices, saying I was throwing away my potential. The friction between us escalated quietly over the years until it turned into a deep, simmering resentment on her part. I'd never expected her to do something so outlandish, so malicious. But as I gathered my thoughts, I began to suspect exactly what might be going on. She wanted my house. After all, I'd inherited a small property in our home state, a quaint 2-bedroom place on a half-acre of land. My father had left it to me in his will because he believed I was more financially responsible, better poised to maintain it. Lorelei, resentful as always, had contested the will at the time but lost in court. So she was forced to leave it be. Now, I guessed she was staging some elaborate ruse, painting me as an irresponsible soldier who had vanished, thereby justifying a legal claim that I'd effectively abandoned the property. The next day, I marched straight up to Captain Alvarez's office. The walk from my quarters to the admin building normally took less than 5 minutes, but that day it felt like a mile. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and anxiety, and I replayed potential scenarios in my mind. Captain Alvarez was a reasonable man, but this situation was undeniably unusual. The notion that my own family had reported me as AWOL was unprecedented in my experience. I could only imagine what the captain thought, receiving that phone call from someone who purported to be a worried family member. When I arrived, I knocked firmly and entered upon his command. He sat behind his desk, hands folded, a stern expression on his face. On the wall behind him hung a crisp American flag and a framed photograph of our unit receiving a citation. He gestured for me to sit. "What is this about you being AWOL?" he asked, his tone neutral but with an undercurrent of concern. "Sir," one started, choosing my words carefully, "I have no idea why my sister made that report, but I am absolutely not AWOL. My orders are valid, and you can see them in the system. I've been here for the entire duration. I suspect it's a personal matter. She may be attempting to seize my property by painting me as unreliable." Captain Alvarez sighed, tapped on his keyboard, and pulled up my personnel file. After a moment, he nodded. "Yes, your orders are all in order. There's no reason to doubt you. But the fact your family contacted the command about you being missing, that's concerning. Is there a chance they truly believe you're missing?" I clenched my jaw, trying not to let anger seep into my voice. It's more likely my sister is staging this. I've had issues with her in the past concerning inheritance disputes. I think she's trying to lay groundwork to declare me incompetent or absent. He studied me for a moment before giving a reluctant nod. "All right. I'll note that you're present and accounted for, that you haven't been AWOL at all. I'll make sure the official records reflect your status, so there's no question. That said, you might want to take steps to protect yourself legally. The last thing you need is more of these false reports clouding your record. I left the office with both relief and a new determination. My sister had openly tried to sabotage my military record to get her hands on the house. This felt like more than just a petty sibling quarrel. It was an attack on my livelihood, my honor, and my future. If she succeeded in any way muddying my reputation or sowing confusion, it could have catastrophic consequences for me. Yet I told myself to keep calm, plan carefully, and, when necessary, fight back with every resource I had. Within days, I found out that my mother had also been roped into the story my sister was spinning. Though my mother and I had a more cordial relationship, she wasn't the strongest-willed person, and Lorelei, with her forceful demeanor, could bend Mom's opinions easily. According to rumor, they were telling neighbors and extended family that I'd become irresponsible, traveling the world on reckless missions, that I'd abandoned my responsibilities, and that I might never come back. I seethed in disbelief. Worse yet, I'd heard from an old friend back home that there was talk of my sister filing a legal motion to claim guardianship or caretaker control over the property, alleging that I was missing in action. Eager for a solution, I reached out to the base legal assistance office. The duty attorney, Lieutenant Morris, listened sympathetically as I explained the bizarre situation. He agreed to help me draft letters clarifying my military status, which I could send to relevant authorities and to any local court that might be tricked into believing my sister's nonsense. He warned, though, that if Lorelei was cunning, she might have a lawyer of her own who would push questionable claims, hoping to slip things past the system. The best approach, Morris advised, is to be proactive. Make sure she can't even get a foot in the door. A month passed, and I had half a mind to request emergency leave to sort this out in person. But our deployment had heated up. We were needed in that dusty region, carrying out a critical mission. I found myself on patrol most days, scanning ridgelines for threats, bunking down at odd hours. The stress of my duties combined with this personal family betrayal weighed heavily on me. On nights when mortar fire echoed in the distance, I would lie awake, not from fear of the bombardment, though that was scary enough, but because I knew that while I was risking my life in uniform, my sister was back home scheming to undermine me. As soon as our operations stabilized enough for me to take leave, I pounced on the chance. I flew stateside, exhausted from the long journey, but determined. The moment I landed in my hometown, I drove straight to my house. It was a humble place, with a trimmed front lawn, a faded porch swing. Nothing fancy, but it was mine a link to my father's memory, a quiet sanctuary for me to return to whenever I managed to pull myself away from the chaotic demands of service. Pulling up to my driveway, I noticed something off immediately. A car I didn't recognize was parked in front. Sure enough, as I approached the porch, the front door swung open, and out stepped my sister Lorelei, looking equal parts startled and defiant. She flicked her eyes over me, as though she never expected me to have the audacity to come home. "I thought you were overseas," she said, crossing her arms. "Nice to see you too," I replied bitterly. "I got wind of your little stunt, reporting me as AWOL. Care to explain?" She let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, so that's what this is about. I was worried about you. We all were. You vanished, and the family didn't know if you'd gone AWOL or been." I cut her off. "Save it, Lorelei. I've been on legitimate orders with my unit this entire time. You know that. Don't pretend you reported me AWOL out of concern. I know you want the house." She pursed her lips and glanced away, a flicker of guilt dancing across her face. Then she shrugged it off, leaning in. "You're never here. You can't even maintain this place properly. And for your information, it's not just me who thinks so. Mom agrees we need a stable caretaker. You're off in war zones. The grass grows tall and the property's neglected." I gestured around. "It doesn't look neglected to me. I paid someone to mow the lawn, fix the fence, keep it in shape. Everything's in decent order." She glared. "Dad never should have left you the house. You're too wrapped up in your soldiering to handle your responsibilities. It belongs to the family, not just you. Anger flared in me, but I took a slow breath. Dad left it to me in the will. Lorelai, you contested that and lost. There's no excuse for you to sabotage my military record just to get your hands on it. If you keep pushing, you'll regret it. She simply smirked, a nasty twist of her lips. We'll see. I stepped inside, half expecting the place to be ransacked, but surprisingly, it was relatively untouched, just some dusty furniture, as though no one had been living there. Lorelai followed at a distance, her arms folded, looking like she was ready for a fight. I noticed that some of my father's old memorabilia family photos, small sculptures, had been rearranged or placed in boxes near the dining room. It dawned on me that she might have been packing them up, presumably to stash or even sell. Nice job rummaging through Dad's keepsakes, I said, a biting edge creeping into my voice. I hope you haven't sold anything valuable. She feigned offense. I was just organizing them. They were gathering dust, and I figured we should put them in safe storage. I swallowed my fury and decided not to escalate in the moment. Instead, I spent that first day back going through the house, checking for damage, making note of anything out of place. My sister eventually left in a huff, as though she had better things to do. I locked up behind her, slid the deadbolt home, and took stock of the situation. My mind reeled at the audacity. Reporting me AWOL to my commanding officer was a low blow, even for her, but apparently she'd also used it as an excuse to come into my home and start rearranging things. My sense of violation was profound. The next day, I made a beeline for the county courthouse. I had an appointment with a lawyer recommended by Lieutenant Morris, a civilian attorney named George Bell. He was an older gentleman with thick framed glasses and a calm demeanor. I explained everything: the AWOL accusations, the forced entry into my property, the rumors that my sister was filing motions to claim caretaker rights. Bell listened patiently, occasionally scribbling notes. Once I finished, he interlaced his fingers and leaned forward. "It's a brazen scheme," he said, "but family disputes over inheritance can get ugly. The good news is you're clearly on active duty, not missing at all, so the AWOL angle won't stand up in court if challenged properly. However, if she's been spinning tales of your negligence, claiming the property is at risk, we need to dispel that quickly, with documented proof that you have indeed maintained it. We'll also prepare an injunction if she tries to lay claim to the property or represent herself as caretaker." I nodded, relief and anger swirling within me. "Thank you. That's exactly what I need." Bell filed several motions on my behalf over the next week, putting the local judge on notice that I was present, that there was no AWOL situation, and that any rumors of my vanishing were outright lies. We included documentation from my commanding officer, verifying my active duty status, plus records of the property maintenance I had paid for a landscaping service contract, a local contractor's receipt for small repairs. But Lorelai responded with a volley of her own. She claimed that my father had never truly intended for me to keep the house, and that I was ignoring the property's needs between deployments. She even produced statements from a few neighbors, some of whom she'd likely bribed or manipulated, saying, "The house often sat empty and looked abandoned from time to time." A swirl of frustration threatened to consume me. I was forced to go around and gather statements from more credible neighbors who knew that the place was tended to regularly. At the same time, I took pictures, compiled receipts, typed up letters. The months of being deployed, then returning stateside to engage in this legal quagmire, felt surreal. My life was a seesaw. On one side, the serious business of the Army. On the other, a ridiculous but dangerous family feud that threatened to overshadow everything I'd worked for. Whenever I had free time, I'd drive over to my mother's place, hoping I could talk sense into her. She lived in a modest condo, perched near the outskirts of town. The first time I visited, she opened the door hesitantly, as though uncertain what reception I'd get or give. "Mom," I said gently, stepping inside, "I need you to tell me the truth. Why are you letting Lorelai do this? You know I'm not AWOL or anything close to that." She wrung her hands, her gaze shifting to the floor. "Lorelai said she was just worried about you. She told me she tried calling your base, and no one could confirm where you were. That's all I know. I sighed in exasperation. Mom, that's nonsense. We both know it takes a specific chain of command request to confirm a soldier's whereabouts, and even then, it's not open to the public. She's lying. She's trying to get me in trouble so she can claim the house. My mother looked away, clearly uncomfortable. You and Lorelai have so much tension. I wish your father hadn't left the house solely to you. It created a rift. That's not my fault, I replied, trying to keep my temper in check. He had reasons. Maybe he felt she couldn't handle money. Regardless, it's done. I want you to understand. I'm not the villain here. I'm not neglecting my responsibilities. I'm serving my country, and Dad entrusted the house to me. I wish Lorelai could respect that. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, but said nothing more. I realized she was too timid to stand up to my sister, or maybe she simply felt torn. I pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead and left, feeling that the conversation had done little to change her mindset. Nonetheless, I hoped a seed of doubt was planted. Maybe she'd realize how destructive Lorelai's behavior was. By the time I appeared in court for the preliminary hearing on Lorelai's caretaker claim, tension coiled in my stomach like a spring. She arrived wearing a crisp blouse, accompanied by her attorney, a smug-looking man in a pinstriped suit. As we waited outside the courtroom, she shot me a glare. I straightened my shoulders and stared straight back, unflinching. This was it. I'd poured my energy into gathering evidence to disprove her AWOL story. My attorney, George Bell, had assured me we had a strong case. Still, the unpredictability of these hearings had me on edge. The hearing itself was a tense affair. Lorelai's attorney tried to paint me as an absentee homeowner who put the property at risk. He hinted that I'd been derelict in my duties, often away for extended periods. He made it sound like the yard was overgrown, the windows left to crack, the roof about to cave in. Meanwhile, Lorelai was supposedly the concerned, responsible family member who wanted to preserve the home's value for everyone. I nearly choked on my anger, but I kept my composure, letting Bell present the counter evidence, updated photos of the property, official statements from the caretaker I hired, plus the affidavit from Captain Alvarez, who verified that I was never AWOL. In the end, the judge was unimpressed by Lorelai's claims of my disappearance. She asked pointedly why Lorelai had told the army I was AWOL if she supposedly just wanted to look after the house. Lorelai tried to spin a tale of genuine concern, but the judge's raised eyebrows spoke volumes. She made a preliminary ruling denying Lorelai any caretaker status, clarifying that I was clearly present, active, and handling my affairs. However, the matter of whether Lorelai could later contest my father's will again, or argue for partial ownership, remained unsettled. The judge set another hearing date to consider that, pending further evidence. For now, I'd won the first battle, but the war wasn't over. I spent the next few weeks shoring up my defenses, both legally and physically. I had new locks installed, updated my home security system, and placed motion sensor cameras around the exterior. A friend from high school, who'd started a security company, gave me a discount. He understood the stakes. If my sister was so desperate as to file false reports to my command, who knew what lengths she might go to next? During that stretch, I found more evidence of her sabotage. A local bank official, an acquaintance of mine from years ago, discreetly informed me that Lorelai had tried to present a power of attorney, claiming I'd granted her authority to handle my financial matters while I was deployed. She wanted access to my accounts, presumably to pull mortgage statements or property tax records. Fortunately, the bank recognized something fishy, since the power of attorney document seemed off, lacking official notarization. They refused her, but the audacity of forging such a document left me reeling. My sister had crossed a legal line. That was a turning point for me. I felt a deep moral outrage, a desire for justice that bordered on revenge. Yes, I wanted to secure my property, but now I also wanted to expose Lorelai for the lying fraud she was. She didn't just want the house, she wanted to paint me as a deserter, an irresponsible person, to achieve her ends. That I couldn't forgive. My father had taught me about standing up for what's right, about integrity. So I made a vow. If she was going to wage war, I'd match her step for step and ensure that when I was finished, she wouldn't dare try this again. I approached an investigator, someone with ties to both the Army and civilian legal channels, named Andrew Redmond. Andrew specialized in cases where soldiers were defrauded or targeted by malicious family members. After hearing my story, he was incensed on my behalf. He agreed to help me gather evidence of Lorelai's wrongdoing, from the false AWOL report to the forged power of attorney. We started with phone records. Andrew managed to get logs from my sister's calls to the base. He traced the timeline of her calls, noting how she'd claimed to be worried but consistently pressed for statements that I was absent. He also found evidence of calls to local government offices, asking questions about how to declare someone incompetent or missing. The pattern was clear. She was systematically laying a foundation to wrest control of my property. We also interviewed the landscaping service I'd hired, capturing their statements about Lorelai showing up, demanding that they stop working, or that they send all invoices to her. They refused, but she'd tried to manipulate them. With every new piece of evidence, my anger simmered, but so did my determination. This was beyond sibling rivalry, it was straight-up fraud. At one point, we discovered that she'd created an email account in my name and sent messages to extended relatives about being sick of the Army and wanting to run off. She used this to push the narrative that I might have abandoned my post. Once I saw that, there was no doubt in my mind. Lorelai was going to extreme measures. This wasn't just about the house's financial value, there was something deeper, maybe a personal vendetta. Perhaps she resented that Dad believed in me more, or that I'd been chosen as the heir to this modest property. Regardless, she'd become the enemy, and I was going to defend myself with everything I had. Redmond suggested we compile all these findings into a comprehensive report, then present them to the local district attorney as evidence of attempted fraud, forgery, and possibly even criminal impersonation. My first instinct was to handle it privately, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I didn't press charges or at least push the authorities to look at her crimes, she might get away with a slap on the wrist. The ramifications of her forging documents alone were significant. I wanted her to face real consequences, to understand that she couldn't treat people this way, not even her brother. Around this time, I also found a surprising ally in the form of my mother. She finally broke under the pressure of Lorelai's constant manipulation. One evening, she called me, voice trembling. She said Lorelai had pressured her into signing an affidavit claiming the house was neglected, but she felt sick about it because she knew it was a lie. Mom wanted to recant her statement and set the record straight in court. I drove to her condo immediately. When I arrived, I saw how shaken she was. Lorelai had threatened to cut her off, to never speak to her again, to claim she was senile if she refused to cooperate. My mother was in tears, torn between loyalty to her daughter and the knowledge that Lorelai's scheme was wrong. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, gripping my hands. "I just couldn't stand up to her. She's so forceful, so sure of herself." I hugged her, feeling a surge of empathy. "Mom, it's okay. What matters is you're doing the right thing now. We'll fix this. You just need to tell the judge the truth, that Lorelai coerced you, that she's lying about me." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I will. I promise." The next morning, we went together to see George Bell. He took Mom's statement. She admitted Lorelai had shown her fake letters from me, letters supposedly riddled with confessions about deserting, about leaving the Army. Mom realized they were forgeries, but Lorelai insisted they were genuine, that I'd slipped them to her somehow. Mom felt forced to comply. Now, though, she wanted to renounce the entire charade. Bell carefully documented everything, ensuring we had sworn testimony. This was a major turning point. If Lorelai lost Mom's support, she lost a key piece of evidence for her caretaker claim. The second court hearing was scheduled a few weeks later. By then, I'd grown wary but resolute, prepared to face Lorelai's lies head-on. She and her attorney arrived first, looking triumphant, which told me they expected some sort of victory. Maybe they thought they'd blindsided me with new allegations. But as soon as we all sat down, George Bell presented the bombshell, my mother's recanted statement, her sworn testimony that Lorelei had coerced her and fabricated details. The judge's face hardened. Lorelei's attorney started sputtering excuses, but the damage was done. My mother's reversal was devastating for their case. I will never forget Lorelei's expression: shock, betrayal, then outright fury directed at our mother. She tried to interject, accusing Mom of lying, but the judge sternly reminded everyone to remain silent until recognized. Bell pressed on, unveiling copies of the forged power of attorney, the suspicious phone records, and an affidavit from the landscaping company. He showed emails from the fictitious account Lorelei had created in my name. It was a thorough, damning presentation. When Lorelei's turn came, her attorney tried to poke holes in our evidence, but it was futile. Their case had no real foundation. The judge announced that this was beyond a simple property dispute. It sounded like a deliberate attempt at fraud and a malicious campaign to undermine a service member's standing. The judge declared in no uncertain terms that I remained the lawful owner, fully capable of managing my own property. She dismissed Lorelei's caretaker petition with prejudice, meaning Lorelei couldn't just file it again under a different pretense. Furthermore, she referred the matter of forged documents to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. The air in the courtroom felt electric as the judge's gavel came down. Lorelei's face drained of color. She stumbled out of the courtroom, her attorney trailing behind, quickly offering advice about the next steps. I watched them go, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My mother clutched my arm, relief and guilt mingling on her features. "I'm so sorry it came to this," she said again. "It's all right," I murmured, feeling exhaustion settling into my bones. "The truth is out. That's what matters." In the weeks that followed, the district attorney did indeed open an investigation into Lorelei's forgeries and false statements. Through Redmond's help, I shared the evidence we'd compiled. Lorelei ended up facing charges for document forgery and attempted fraud. I'd be lying if I said I felt nothing when I heard that the DA intended to prosecute. A part of me hurt to see my own sister in such a predicament, but a bigger part of me felt that it was a just consequence. You don't get to sabotage someone's life, especially a sibling, with lies and forgeries, and walk away unscathed. At the same time, I worried for my mother. This ordeal had taken a toll on her. She'd admitted she was ashamed she didn't put her foot down sooner, but at least she was now on the path to healing. I promised to check on her regularly, ensure she was okay, and make sure Lorelei didn't intimidate her further. For a while, I braced myself for the possibility of retaliation from Lorelei, but perhaps the seriousness of the criminal investigation forced her to back off. She kept her distance, rarely appearing in public. When the case finally proceeded, Lorelei's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. The DA insisted on probation at minimum, along with restitution for my legal costs. On the day of the sentencing, I sat in the back of the courtroom, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, disappointment. Lorelei stood before the judge, wearing a navy suit, eyes hollow. She seemed smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of her own machinations had crushed her spirit. She ultimately pled guilty to a lesser charge of forgery, avoiding jail time, but she was placed on probation for 2 years, had to pay fines and my attorney fees, and was explicitly barred from interfering in my property affairs. If she violated any terms, she'd face jail. The judge's final words were stern: "You attempted to weaponize the legal system with false claims against a member of our armed forces. That is inexcusable. I trust you will reflect on the harm you've caused." I left the courthouse with a sense of closure. Yes, the sibling bond was effectively shattered, but in truth it had been broken long before she called my command and accused me of being AWOL. This, at least, was a resolution that saw justice served. She couldn't continue her manipulations or cause further damage. Back at my house that evening, I stood on the porch and watched the sun dip behind the horizon. My heart felt lighter. The yard smelled fresh. The grass rustled in a gentle breeze, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. There was a deep gratification in knowing the truth was affirmed. My military record was unblemished, and I could continue serving without a dark cloud hovering overhead. But it wasn't just relief I felt, it was also a sense of righteous triumph. Lorelei tried to take me down, to con the courts, to degrade my standing as a soldier, all for a piece of property that belonged to me by our father's will. She learned the hard way that her cruelty, cunning though it was, couldn't stand against truth and perseverance. When push came to shove, the law sided with the facts, and she faced the consequences of her own deceit. A few days later, I held a small gathering at my home, a cookout of sorts, inviting old friends, some sympathetic neighbors, and my mother. It was partly a celebration of the house's rightful ownership, partly a vow that I wouldn't let anything tear me away from this anchor again. Mom showed up, timid but smiling, grateful that everything had resolved. She pulled me aside at one point, pressed a fragile hand on my arm, and whispered, "I know I failed you for a time, but I'm so proud of you for standing your ground and never losing your sense of right and wrong." I hugged her, my voice catching in my throat. "Thank you, Mom. Let's just move forward. The past is over." As we lit the grill, the sun still shining brightly overhead, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months, maybe even years. There was laughter and conversation, old friends reminiscing. Now, if I had to redeploy, I could do so with a clear mind, knowing the property was secure, that my sister's scheme had collapsed, and that I held the house free from her interference. Even more so, it felt good to know that justice was not just a word in the dictionary, it was something real, something that, with the right effort and evidence, could be achieved. Over the following months, my sister kept a low profile. The few times I caught wind of her, she was apparently completing her probation requirements, paying off fines, and trying to repair her own social standing. Some distant relatives told me she was furious at how things turned out, blaming me for ruining her life. I refused to be drawn into that drama. I moved on, content to have stability and truth firmly in my corner. Occasionally, I felt a twinge of sadness, wondering what might have been if only we'd grown up without this tension, if only she'd chosen to be family instead of an adversary. But regret could do nothing to change her choices. Maybe one day, far in the future, we'd speak again, but only after she truly owned up to her behavior. By the time my next deployment rolled around, my property was fully secured, my mother was on board with the truth, and every official record reflected that I had never been AWOL. Indeed, in the Army's eyes, I was recognized for faithfully carrying out my duties. Captain Alvarez, upon hearing the final resolution, patted me on the shoulder and said, "Glad you got that all sorted, soldier. You didn't deserve that nonsense, but you handled it. Proud of you for keeping your head." I managed to grin, thankful for a commanding officer who believed in me from the start. Before I left, I spent a few last days at the house, sitting on the old porch swing, remembering my father and the modest life he built there. I'd run my hand along the wooden railing, scuffed but sturdy, a testament to the home's longevity. The sun would set in golden hues, and I felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. Yes, the betrayal still stung, but I refused to let it corrode my spirit. I had fought and won, not just for the property, but for my name, my dignity, and the memory of my father's trust. Some people asked if I felt it was a hollow victory, with my sister no longer in my life. But I always answered the same. I'd rather stand by truth and justice, alone if necessary, than be complicit in lies just to keep a tenuous family bond. The sweet irony was that Lorelei had tried to call me a deserter, someone who ran away, when in fact it was she who ran away from honesty and decency. And in the end, I'd stood my ground, confronted the lies, and watched them crumble under the bright light of truth. As for a sense of revenge, I suppose there was an element of it in seeing her humiliated in court, forced to admit wrongdoing. But more than that, it was vindication. The powerful validation that evil schemes don't always prosper. I found closure in knowing the law had thoroughly seen through her illusions. The day before my flight out to rejoin my unit, I made a final round of the property, double-checking everything. My new security cameras blinked reassuringly, the yard looked neat, and the windows were locked. I paused in the living room where my father's old recliner still stood and placed a hand on the faded fabric. I closed my eyes, allowing a swell of gratitude to wash over me. Despite everything, I was still standing, still the rightful keeper of this place, still determined to honor my father's memory and the life lessons he'd given me, stand strong against injustice, protect what's yours, and never stoop to the level of those who do you wrong. When I locked the door and walked away, I carried the key in my pocket, a small but meaningful emblem of victory. The fiasco that had started with a nasty AWOL report ended with justice served. I had my home, my honor, and a renewed faith in the power of truth. That day, the sky was bright, the air warm, and a gentle breeze whispered across the treetops. I took one last look at the home that symbolized both family and inheritance, reminding myself that no matter the storms that might come, perseverance and integrity can keep a person anchored. And with that, I slipped into my car, turned the ignition, and headed off to the next chapter of my life, fully vindicated, carrying the sweet weight of a well-deserved triumph, and ready to continue serving, head held high, knowing that at long last, justice had been done and all was right once again.